I'm glad to welcome you to the People Management course for Human Resources Professionals. As is tradition, this first session of the course is held in an open format. Today we'll be discussing what people management is and the role of a manager in a company. In case we haven't met yet, though that's unlikely at this point, my name is Mike Pritula. Here's a list of companies I've worked for. They are Alpha Bank, Starlight Media Gaming, and Preply. Currently, I'm collaborating with the PeopleForce company. I also have my own academy called MT Academy, and I consult various companies on human resources matters. In my work, I rely on global best practices, and I recommend to you a list of companies that I consider reputable, especially in the field of human resources, which I suggest you keep an eye on. I'd also appreciate it if you could write a bit about yourself, tell us where you're tuning in from, your position and company, so we can get an idea of who's attending today's session. You can write this comfortably in the chat. As I continue, please write your responses. Once they're in, I'll read them and carry on with my presentation. Those of you already enrolled in the course will receive diplomas once all homework assignments are completed. So, as soon as you complete your homework, you'll receive a course completion certificate. They are issued on the platform using special credentials. For example, Google also issues their diplomas on the same platform. Our course consists of 6 sessions. Over these 6 sessions, we'll explore what managers should do to make the collaboration between human resources and management as effective as possible. The idea behind this course is that human resources can certainly be highly qualified, very cool, very skilled, and capable of doing a lot. However, if managers don't handle a relatively small part of the work in their regular activities, many human resources processes simply won't function. Because while human resources develops many policies, processes, and various schemes, it's the manager who implements them. For example, one-on-one meetings, goal setting, employee development, and so on. All of this is done by the manager. Human resources can only design and implement. Therefore, the aim of this course is to provide an understanding of what HR should expect from a manager, what managers should do to ensure that the collaboration between HR and management is as effective as possible. Now let me continue reading your comments. Today is our first session of this course. Today we'll discuss the 5 levels of people management. We'll talk about research by Google and Gallup and the 20 most important management tools that HR should know about. Of course, managers should know this too. So the course that you're now watching the first session of, it somewhat mirrors the management course where I teach managers how to lead people. But that information is for managers, and here it's the same information, but more condensed for HR so that HR professionals know that for the HR system to work perfectly in a company, HR needs to do this. This is what HR should do. We teach in our HR Director and HR Formula courses, but there should also be work done on the manager's side. And here's what should be done on the manager's side. This is like an addition to make this collaboration work as effectively as possible. So I'll start by saying that, in general, leaders lead effectively when they understand the essence of their role, possess the necessary talents, tools, and so on. But this isn't always the case. Most HR professionals will likely encounter managers who, through no fault of their own, can't even lead well, let alone excellently. Why? Firstly, in many industries, managers are quite young. This means they simply haven't had time to learn. If there used to be some barrier to entry for managerial positions, it has now disappeared. In modern, such as Enter the Industry, executives can become the guys are very young. Next, it is very common for executives to be a former expert. That is, they were good at something, they are good at something, they were made leaders, but that does not make them good leaders. Next, very often companies are not evaluated by executives, so executives just don't know that they are not very good at leading. Further, there are no management standards. Well, except for the MBA. Such a level, expensive diploma that only those who decided on them get, another some standard that talk to the head, you have to do this, this, and this, no. And there's no certification other than certification in project management or, which isn't really about executives. Nevertheless, it cannot be said that managers have been bypassed and that there is no good base for managers on how to manage. There are all kinds of books, organizations, studies, and models that talk about who a good leader is. Now we're going to meet them today. One of these most interesting, most authoritative studies on the topic of management is GALA's. I'm sure you've heard of a company that has a GQ questionnaire, an engagement questionnaire. But that's just one of the products. They have a wide variety of products. And one of the areas is executive research. To date, GALA has been conducting research for over 40 years. Over 2.5 million teams studied, over 105 and over 27 million employees. Why do I say that? Because they update this information every 6 months, once a year, so obviously they have gone further ahead. What does G Company's research say? That globally, over 30% of employees are not engaged. It's a known situation. But the fact is that these people are not involved for the most part because of their supervisors. In other words, 70% of employee engagement depends on managers. And with ours in HR courses, we are constantly working, learning how to increase engagement. But if leaders don't do their part in engagement, employees won't be engaged. In this course, for example, we explore and what specifically executives should be doing, what not, what charters should be doing with engagement, what executives should be doing. Why is it very common for managers to fail to engage their employees? Because companies are chosen by the executives and also very often incorrectly. They don't rely on the abilities, on the talents of the executive. They rely on some very diverse factors and then try to fix it. And it works out, unfortunately not always. So the manager is bad, it's extremely difficult to fix, and according to GL's research, only 1 in 10 executives is truly the ideal candidate. Only 1 in 10 has all the necessary talents to manage people, according to GL's research in one of the largest studies ever conducted. At the same time, if the manager does not have talents, very often he or she has to resort to various kinds of manipulation, to politics, and negative factors at that, which is actually what leads to employees not being engaged in the end. I mean, it is not like it is just a company study, it is a reality that we know. And let us be honest, every one of us has worked with that kind of employee, that kind of manager. For example, I remember in my experience, the executives I worked with were fortunately not very many. So vivid, one I can think of that just made me want to run away. I was very fortunate that this driver quickly left on his own, meaning we had an interaction of about 6 months. But here was a man I would never want to work with again. I am sure I can see the upside of the bottom line. You have had people like that in your experience too. That is the problem. But looking ahead, I will give this note of hope. Modern tools, if you as leaders study them, they will not turn a bad leader into an excellent one, but they can minimize all the negative factors. And having human resources professionals or suitable deputy managers in companies can improve the situation. That is why a profession like human resources is in high demand right now, because in many ways they complement leaders. We will soon get to the talents that a leader needs. You will see that essentially human resources complements leaders in this regard. Let us move on. Research by Gallup suggests that 2 out of 10 have a chance. That is, 1 out of 10 is an ideal leader, plus another 2 out of 10 have a chance to become great leaders if the company develops, supports, and trains them. Thus, 30% of leaders can be very good leaders. 10% will naturally be such leaders, and many books have been written about them, like Good to Great or First Break All the Rules. Such books describe excellent leaders. Plus, there are books about successful business people. Another 2 out of 10, if developed, will also become great leaders, meaning 30% of leaders are already there. The remaining leaders need very strong systems and enormous support, not to become perfect leaders, but to avoid being bad leaders. Let us continue. So, managerial talent is rare, unfortunately. That is how it turned out. And according to Gallup's research, a successful manager possesses 5 talents. When a manager possesses these 5 talents, and when companies hire leaders with these talents in mind, companies immediately start seeing huge gains in various types of productivity. Profitability increases, productivity grows, employee and customer engagement rises, turnover decreases, and so on. In other words, it is financially beneficial for a company to hire the right leaders with consideration of their talents. But I will repeat, if hiring is not possible, then by building the right relationship, a partnership between the leader and HR, you can achieve very good results. That is why I created this course, because I know that by training HR we can achieve a lot, but HR needs to understand what to expect from leaders. How to help the leader? What HR can bring to the leader to say, look, please use this so that we have the right partnership and your employees feel good. Let us move on. Managers have the greatest influence on their employees' engagement. A leader's engagement has a direct impact on employee engagement. According to research, the engagement of people under the right leader is 59% higher than those employees who work with a disengaged leader. In other words, if the average engagement level is 30%, then the level that companies can achieve with the right leaders is around 90%. And again, or with the right partnership where HR excellently complements the leaders, which is exactly what we are talking about in this course. Now, let us talk about those talents that Gallup identified by studying 2.5 million teams. It is hard to even imagine more than 40 million people. Let us find out. Gallup has a special tool for assessing talents called Clifton Strengths, and according to research, a talented leader. A talented manager is one who is a motivator, meaning they can motivate employees, is assertive and can overcome adversities, difficulties, and resistance, is responsible, takes responsibility and fosters responsibility in team members, knows how to build the right relationships, can build relationships within the team and beyond, and can make decisions, is not afraid to make decisions, makes them correctly and fairly, even in uncertain conditions, and so on. If you look at these talents, motivator, responsibility, relationships, very often this is exactly what is expected from HR. That is, very often this is where leaders expect help from HR, and fortunately HR provides this help to them. For the HR and manager partnership to work perfectly, as I repeat, everyone needs to understand what is expected from both the manager and HR. Therefore, on one hand, I train managers, and on the other hand, there are courses for HR. And there is a course that connects these two things, management for HR, which builds the connection. This is what managers should know. This is what should be expected from them. This is how human resources can participate in this course, which stands at the intersection of human resources and people management. Let's move on. If anyone wants to read the original list of these talents in English from Gallup's research, and for those who want to read the research, it's published on the website. Let's continue. Besides Gallup, which we've already learned today has great research, there are other companies that also care about what makes outstanding leaders outstanding. There's also Google. Google has been researching company management issues since 2008. They actually started this research with an internal joke where the company suggested, maybe we don't need managers at all. Since Google is innovative in many ways and does a lot of experimenting, they kind of posed this question, do we really need managers? Maybe if we have talented engineers working for us, if we recruit them very carefully, we could just eliminate managers altogether. And they created a project which they named Oxygen. As part of this project, they studied their workforce, which at that time wasn't very large, just a few tens of thousands of people. Today they have several 100,000 employees. During that study, they found that managers are indeed necessary and that a team's success with a manager possessing the right set of qualities is higher than the success of a team with a manager lacking these qualities. In their first study, they identified 8 such qualities, the first 8. In the second study, which the company repeated in 2018, they identified 2 more characteristics of managers. So they thought that maybe, after 10 years, we might not need managers after all, but the research showed that we still do. Here are these 10 competencies in Russian. They somewhat echo Gallup's research. But while Gallup's research is more about talents, Google's research is more about behavior and what managers do. Here again, there's a link for those who are interested in reading the study. So, according to Google's research, a good manager is a good coach, empowers their team and doesn't micromanage. They create an atmosphere of team cohesion, care about people's success and well-being, are productive and results-oriented, a good communicator, listens to ideas and information, supports career growth, and discusses employee performance. They have a clear vision and strategy for their team. They have key technical skills necessary to advise the team. They collaborate with everyone in the company, maintain external relationships, and are decisive decision makers, which aligns directly with Gallup's findings. The other qualities overlap in one way or another. Thus, relying on these 2 major studies, Gallup's research on one hand and Google's research on the other, we can already form not just some abstract portrait of a good manager, but a portrait based on serious data. Today, Google employs about 200,000 people. Gallup conducted a study of 40 million people. This means we can trust these studies as the most reliable and extensive research available. We now have an understanding of what to expect from managers. Google also regularly evaluates its managers, and this is something I strongly recommend every company should do, because being a manager is the kind of job where there's no clear sense of how well you're performing. If I make pots, for example, I can tell by looking at a pot whether it's good or bad. If I bake bread, I can generally tell by the bread itself whether it turned out good or bad. If I write code as a developer, I can tell if it's good or bad. In other words, many jobs have clear, specific, measurable performance outcomes. A manager's job doesn't have such clear, measurable outcomes that can definitively indicate they're a good leader. This means that even a poor manager might have generally good business results for various reasons. It could be due to a strong team, favorable circumstances, or something else, but it's not guaranteed these results will last long term. In other words, a manager can only be evaluated over the long term based on how successful or unsuccessful their team is in the long run. Well, the manager themselves might not be able to sense this. That's why the kind of questionnaires that Google uses are extremely useful. They allow managers to see whether they're succeeding or not. Accordingly, for anyone interested, I've already prepared an online form for this report. It's a questionnaire. All you need to do is follow the link, copy it, customize it a bit for your company, and use it to survey employees to evaluate the managers. The presentation will be posted in the MT Academy Telegram chat. You'll see it in this chat today, accordingly. For those not yet in the chat, just search for MT Academy on Telegram, and you'll find this presentation there. Let's move on. Here's another very useful model that complements our understanding of who a modern leader is and how HR should interact with them. This is a model of people management levels. To be honest, I cannot remember exactly which government organization developed this, but I came across it when I was searching for reliable models for leaders. I have studied various sources, and this model stands out. I like this model the most because it describes 5 levels of leaders and what they should be able to do. Again, it ranges from a manager who has only a few subordinates and may not even have full managerial responsibilities yet, such as hiring or firing people, all the way up to the head of the entire company. The 5th level is the head of the entire company. So let's look at these levels and then move on to the final part of today's lesson, what specific tools a leader should use. Today we will present a model of up to 20 tools. This is the most comprehensive one I have ever shown, because in previous courses and classes I have had a model of 10 tools, but here we will have 20. So, the 5 levels of leadership. What should a first level leader be able to do? This is a leader often called a team leader, supervisor, or coordinator, team lead, or simply called chief, chief recruiter, chief engineer, or chief something else who has some subordinates they manage. Here is a list of what they should know, be able to do, and actually do. They monitor and address issues of well-being in the workplace. They measure and eliminate irritating factors in the work environment that limit productivity. They resolve labor relation issues and provide mediation, that is, negotiate when necessary. They manage workload reasonably and efficiently, distributing it if needed. They resolve interpersonal or personal issues affecting productivity, minimize stress factors in the workplace as much as possible, quickly address harassment or discrimination issues, resolve such conflicts, and recognize and appreciate good work. This is basically what a lower level manager should do. These are very simple tasks, focusing more on relationships. The next second level manager is a typical department head who has the authority to hire people, give bonuses, fire, approve vacations, initiate salary reviews, assign tasks, monitor performance, and so on. A bit more is expected from this level. Usually the next level includes everything from the previous level. That is, the second level should have everything from the first level plus everything at the second level. These managers strictly adhere to human resource management guidelines. These are the very principles that are most often developed by HR, the HR director's team. That is, in terms of hiring, performance management, development, retention, compensation, and so on. Ensures fair and effective recruitment mechanisms, competitive selection processes, and training and development practices. They strictly fulfill the obligations associated with management responsibilities. These are the tools that I will show you later, which means that this manager applies them in their work. They do not ask, why do we need this? Yeah, let us just do it somehow. They understand that there are tools and they need to be applied. It is the quality of a good manager to apply these tools. That is why they are needed, and that is why I follow them. They then teach others about the importance of following sound HR practices, but this applies to those at the first level. Takes corrective action when HR practices do not align with the company's resource management policies. They seek advice from others on how to solve problems in implementing practices, managing personnel, or applying HR procedures. Here they usually turn to HR, among others. Now the third level, they should have everything from previous levels, plus fairly evaluate individual work, taking diversity into account, identify opportunities that arise for people and contribute to their development, works one-on-one with employees to better understand their strengths and contributions, provides regular feedback, recognizes success and areas for improvement, balances employee and organizational needs, develops and maintains individual career plans and learning opportunities, and quickly responds to performance inefficiencies. This is an experienced department head or a manager who already oversees several departments. The next level is usually those directly under the CEO, that is the HR director, marketing director, finance director, commercial director, and so on. What does this person do? And what should they be doing? Coordinates work to maximize individual strengths and addresses areas requiring development. Optimizes team diversity to create strong teams with complementary strengths. This refers to the diversity of personality types. One of the essences of teamwork is that successful teams are composed of different personality types. Seeks to attract a team of people with complementary skills. Trains, challenges, creates opportunities for growth by identifying new team assignments or sharing experiences between teams. In other words, works as a shadow coach performing group assignments. Develops HR strategy, department succession planning, secures funding for developmental training, creates a group of experts to address specific or crisis issues, and fosters an atmosphere of openness, trust, and solidarity among team members. That's what they do. And finally, a fifth level leader, what is expected of a CEO. Here, it's more about strategy for the future, about creating opportunities for the organization. They implement a human resource management strategy aimed at ensuring staffing capacity and workforce diversity to meet current and future needs. Develop a succession planning strategy that supports the organization's future credibility. Seek out and consider early warning signs regarding resources and succession planning, adapting workforce plans and strategies as needed. Strengthens leadership qualities throughout the company, ensures management teams work on staff development based on career planning and development assessments. Engages in building an effectively sustainable organization through human resource management, integrates human resource planning needs into the organization's business plans, and strengthens accountability and creates value for managing people within the broader organizational community. This is what's expected of a CEO. Now let's talk about tools. Here are the two most important management tools that executives should know, without which work in the company won't be complete. I'll say it again, HR can spend forever implementing great approaches, processes, policies, templates, anything. If managers don't use these, don't work with them, don't implement them on their end, it won't work. In other words, it'll all be more of a formality. That's why HR needs to understand that there's a set of things on the manager's side that managers must do to ensure that what HR does produces results. That's exactly why in some companies, even with professional HR, many things don't work. They don't understand why we've developed a great onboarding policy. Why isn't it working? Why do we have a problem with employee onboarding? Because at the HR level it works, but at the manager level it doesn't work. The manager does nothing, doesn't support it in any way. They don't use the tools and think it's HR's responsibility. Although the manager, as a person who at their stage, we saw this in the 5 levels, should be implementing all of this. HR develops it for them. HR here is like a center of expertise providing the tools. Here you go, but managers must apply them. So let's look at all the main tools. Today we'll cover them briefly, but in the course we'll go into more detail and cover more of them. So the first thing a manager should be able to do is create a job profile for each of their employees. The HR job profile is needed in recruiting to understand who to look for. It's needed for developing a KPI system to understand what a person does and what they can be rewarded for. In development training, to understand what competencies are needed. In job evaluation and grading, to understand how much to pay for positions. In legal matters, for drafting job descriptions and so on. But obviously no one can create this better than the manager themselves. Therefore, the job profile is the manager's first tool. The second tool is the scorecard or candidate evaluation card. This is what a manager should work with when interviewing candidates. They should understand that the selection process is the process of compiling a scorecard based on the criteria that were specified in the job profile and refined so that they could be evaluated during the interview. In modern management, this is called a score, or in Russian, candidate evaluation. If the manager doesn't conduct competency-based interviews, doesn't give evaluations, then again, no matter how hard HR tries, people will be hired into the company for very strange criteria that are unclear to HR, the company, or anyone else. That's why the scorecard is tool number 2. Tool number 3 is the employee onboarding checklist. What is a checklist? It's the manager's understanding that when a new person joins the company, there are mandatory actions that must be taken, including by the manager. This is just an example of one of the stages before starting work. There's also a stage on the first day, and if it's after starting, we'll study these points in more detail during the course. But managers need to keep in mind that when an employee starts, they can't just bury their head in the sand like an ostrich and hope things will sort themselves out or that the company will organize everything. HR will organize everything. No, as a manager, I have my own responsibilities. Yes, it's great when there's HR to help. They can really help, but as a manager, I have my responsibilities. If I don't fulfill them, the employee won't adapt. They might quit. It might take longer for them to become effective. There could be problems with the team, dissatisfaction, less loyalty, and so on. However, this problem can be normal. The manager should understand that adaptation is a list of actions that the manager, among others, must perform. The fourth tool is the employee handbook. Although here, in many ways, it is expected that HR will write it, but for the manager, it would be very useful to prepare such an employee handbook about our department, because HR can write about some general things. They can write volumes about the company, culture, and some rules, but each department has its own internal rules, principles, and work processes. And the manager can best describe this in the form of what is called an employee handbook. You could also call it a playbook. This is a set of documents, recommendations, and instructions given to a new employee who joins this specific department. And it is better to write it once, I understand it will take some time, than to have to communicate and explain things every time. Where something is forgotten or lost, then some employee behavior causes the manager's dissatisfaction or relying on other employees to train. It is better to write it once. Tool number 5 is understanding that employee teamwork is also work, that the manager's task is not only to hire people, not only to help them adapt, not only to train them how to work in this company and department, but also to ensure they work well together as a team. There are different approaches here, but one of the approaches I like best is Patrick Lencioni's approach. He has a good book on this topic called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. You may have heard of it. Where he explains that any team, as it comes together, goes through 5 dysfunctions that a leader must work to eradicate. That is, only the leader can help the team overcome them. So the team on its own probably will not be able to. There is a special test for this, it is on your screen. In general, the manager should understand that the team will only work well together if at least some effort is made, even if it is small. The 6th tool is the development plan. This is the ability to develop your employees and the skill to create development plans based on needs, past performance results, and the employee's wishes and ambitions, which consists of developing knowledge, skills, and competencies, has deadlines and various development tools. That is, to create these plans. Because if a manager has some professional employees, they might be able to create their own development plan. But if the employees are not very professional, then again, few people besides the manager will be able to create a good development plan. Therefore, the development plan is the 6th tool that HR should hand over to the manager for them to use, so that this part of employee training and development also works. Moving on to the 7th point, this is the bench. This is the ability to plan internal replacements. This is about succession planning, by the way. It has been written about a lot in the 5 levels. In English, this is called succession planning, which is the manager's ability to understand who can potentially replace whom, and not only understand this, but to prepare and develop these people, and when the opportunity arises, to actually transfer them. Otherwise, the manager will face negative situations when a valuable employee leaves. They have to be retained with unthinkable amounts of money or persuasion. They are no longer motivated, knowledge is lost, and they will end up leaving anyway. And there are a lot of problems that can arise when important employees leave. Therefore, the manager must understand this, and should have the concept of a bench in mind, and must implement it. Again, HR can also do a lot on their part. Much of what the manager needs to work on will be the HR part not working perfectly. The 8th tool a manager will need for the bench, though it is useful for many things, is the ability to categorize their employees based on their effectiveness or performance, which is essentially the same thing, as well as their potential. In other words, the ability to understand that there are different types of employees in my department relative to the positions they hold. In particular, there is a matrix called 9-box, where there are 9 different positions or states of employees, ranging from the most talented, that is, those who have the highest potential and are the most effective, to the least talented and least effective, who should already be considered for dismissal because they do not fit. Also understanding that there are employees who have potential but are not yet effective, and whether they need to be trained or moved to another position. There are employees who are effective but do not have much potential. They do not need to be pushed further as they have already reached their maximum. In general, the manager needs to understand and deal with all of this. The 9th tool is the ability to conduct one-on-one meetings. This is something that HR can in no way do in place of the manager. HR has its own meetings which are more for other purposes like problem solving and development, but conducting one-on-one meetings with their employees is a sacred and direct responsibility of managers. Coaching can be added here. It is good to incorporate elements of coaching, though it is not listed as a separate tool. They are part of the one-on-one meeting. Accordingly, the manager must conduct these meetings. Yes, HR can develop a scheme, can suggest an automation system like where you can track in the database, where people can request, where you can see who is meeting with whom, that is, who is not meeting with whom. But the manager is the only person who can conduct these one-on-one meetings. The 10th tool is the ability to give feedback. I have listed this separately because knowing how to give feedback is important, and many people do not understand it correctly. But firstly, there are specific models for feedback, like the one shown on the screen. Secondly, many managers think that feedback is only necessary when an employee has really messed up and needs to be scolded, or has performed an extraordinary feat and needs to be praised to the skies. And they mistakenly believe that this is an event that happens once a year, and not even with all employees. Although feedback itself implies the ability and requirement to provide feedback on a weekly basis. That is, when the manager simply looks at what the employee has done and gives feedback based on their observations. The 11th tool is the ability to work with engagement. We had employee motivation in the talent section, but modern motivation lies more in the realm of engagement. And as we've seen, engaged employees work more effectively, and their level of engagement depends on the manager. So the manager should know about this Q12 tool that I mentioned, which is known to many HR professionals, but unfortunately not yet to many managers. They should be able to use this tool, not just conduct the survey, but also be able to work with the survey results. In principle, HR can do some things at the company level to increase engagement. If they see that there's a problem in development, they can develop some development programs, but without direct involvement of managers, without the work of managers, HR alone can only achieve one half of the possible result, and the other half will continue to depend on the manager. The 12th point is the manager's ability to deal with burnout. No, to draw attention, I'll show this poem that is often displayed in companies. I think you might have seen this poem too. I use it as a diagnostic tool. I usually ask students if they've seen this picture, this poem, in their company. You can answer right now. Who has seen this picture on the employee's wall in your company? Please give a plus sign. Those watching on Facebook can put it right there on Facebook. Those watching on Zoom can do it in Zoom. Let's take a look. Because when employees post this kind of picture about an immortal pony, it's usually at an extreme stage where people are already severely burned out. People who don't feel like an immortal pony don't even understand this joke. I see Victor gave a plus, not too many. But you know, I'm genuinely happy for those who don't see such a picture in their company. That's great. Let's move on. The next tool that managers should know is understanding that employees are not interested, motivated, attracted, retained, and so on by salary alone. That there's a company's value proposition where salary plays a truly important role, but not the only one, and that there are many other factors. These factors are no less significant than salary, and that salary alone may not be enough to poach, retain, or motivate a person. Even if it's high, there will still be people who need something more. This is about understanding the company's value proposition, understanding its components, how it works. These are 13 tools. The 14th tool for a manager, if you remember, in the description of Google's leadership, there was a point about having a team development strategy. Indeed, a modern leader must understand what strategy is. Many people know the word strategy. This is something I've already studied in my courses. Many people know what strategy is, that it's a plan of action to achieve goals. Almost no one knows how a strategy is developed. Only those who have read the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, or have taken a course where strategy was taught based on this book, because nowhere else is there proper information about how strategy is developed. Yes, there are many definitions. Many people say they've developed strategies, developed them correctly, but I can only judge this from people's feedback. So the 14th tool is a strategy template. The 15th tool is the ability to set goals. I am, of course, an advocate of the OKR system. I won't say it's the only way to set goals. That is, managers. Again, HR can implement an OKR system. If managers don't set OKR goals, then what HR implements will not be enough. The 16th tool is a performance improvement plan. Managers sometimes know how to work on employee development and how to create a development plan. In addition to a development plan, a company should also have a performance improvement plan. This is about working with employees who are performing poorly. This involves informing them, developing an action plan, and making further decisions. This should be done systematically and with high quality. That's what the 16th tool is about. The 17th tool is understanding how employee compensation works. Understanding that the salary of any employee in their team is somehow related to the market. This is called compa ratio or competitiveness index. When there's the employee's salary, the manager's salary, the market salary, there's an index, and the manager's task is to keep it within certain limits and make decisions considering this index. To make decisions about salary reviews. The 18th tool is understanding the basics of job grading, understanding that positions have different values for the department and for the organization, and the salary will depend on the value of the position. The most valuable positions will have higher salaries. The 19th tool is the ability to review salaries considering the employee's performance and their competitiveness index. There's a special matrix, usually developed by HR, but the manager should understand that when reviewing an employee's salary, I look at the current competitiveness index, salary competitiveness and performance. And at the intersection of these two factors, I decide by what percentage to revise and for whom. And the 20th tool is bonus calculation. It's understanding that bonuses are calculated according to certain rules. The basis for bonus calculation also includes employee performance, plus there may be other factors. It's about understanding how it works and how bonuses are calculated. These are the two tools that a manager should have at their disposal, and this can help. The manager should implement these. HR should know that this is the manager's responsibility to implement these tools. For even greater clarity, the distribution of responsibilities between HR and the manager is outlined here. So everything is described here, well, pretty much everything. The main things a manager should do, their responsibilities, and what HR should do. And if we cross out everything that a manager should do, then what HR does won't work. And if we try to push all these managerial responsibilities onto HR, it will be physically impossible because there's typically one HR department in a company, but 10 or maybe 100 managers, so the time resources are incomparable. HR, in principle, can't conduct one-on-ones with all employees weekly in a company. In a company with 10 people, it might be possible, but with more than 10, it's not. Creating profiles for each employee is not possible for HR. Creating development plans for each employee is many times more work, it's impossible. That's why this connection, this coupling between HR and managers is very important. Here's where HR works, this is their job, and here's where managers work. This is how they synchronize. This first lesson you're listening to is exactly about this. Books that can be recommended? Unfortunately, there's no good book for managers that outlines the tools they should master. There are books on soft skills for managers like The 1-Minute Manager, 45 Tattoos of a Manager, and a bunch of other books. They're useful and contain good ideas, but there's nothing about specific tools. There's a thick book for HR that describes all these tools. It's by Michael Armstrong, the #1 author for HR professionals. His book is now in its 15th edition. He doesn't actually write it himself, he has authors, and he constantly updates it. The only thing is, if you see a Russian translation, they've translated some 10th edition, with chapters selectively translated and very poorly. Don't read it in Russian. In other words, there's no good version of this book in Russian. Only the original in English. So before you go, those of you watching on Facebook, I ask you to share this video so that as many managers as possible can learn about the 20 tools they should master. So I'd be grateful if you could share it. Now, homework for those already on the course. You have a choice. Either evaluate how many of the 20 tools are used by managers in your company, write it down, and assess how many of the 5 talents one of the managers possesses. It could be your immediate supervisor, the company CEO, or someone else. Or the second option is to conduct a manager assessment in one department using a Google questionnaire. It was a choice today, which of these you do. This concludes our first lesson. Next, we'll cover the main areas of a manager's work with their teams. We'll look at these 2 tools in more detail, plus other tools, and discuss how HR can achieve this. First, to understand what the manager should do there, what their responsibilities are as a manager. Second, how to ensure the manager does this, what tools to provide them, and how to strengthen the connection between HR and managers. This will be covered in future sessions. With that, today's session is coming to an end. If you have any questions, please write them down. If anyone wants to share feedback or any insights you've gained today, feel free to do so as well. Write in the chat, I'll be happy to read it out. I want to thank everyone who was online today who listened. Thank you for being here today. I hope it was helpful for you. And I'll be glad to see you at other open sessions as well. Anastasia wrote, thank you. Thank you too, Anastasia. Let's wait a little longer so everyone has time to type. Yes, thank you, and thank you too. And how to watch on YouTube, you can like the video. Okay. Thank you, there's a lot of information to start delving into a specific area. Yes, we'll start soon. Well, thank you all. That's all, we're finished. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye-bye. See you soon.